My name is Carlton Cartwright. I'm the Executive Director for the Veterans Memorial and Multicultural Histories Incorporated. Today is July the
19th.
2023. It is Wednesday. We are at, oh boy, Amy Mercado's office in Orlando, Florida. And sir, what is your name?
It's Tom Keene.
Tom Keene.
Yeah.
Tom, when were you born?
April the 9th, 1956.
And where were you born?
Denver, Colorado.
Okay. All right. And what branch of the service were you in?
I served in the Navy.
United States Navy.
Sir.
From what years?
Well, I raised my hand in 1981. I entered AOCS in 1982 and was commissioned, and then served for 20 years.
Okay. What were you doing at the time? Why did you choose the Navy?
So I tried to join the Air Force, but you can see I wear glasses, and the Air Force turned me down. They said my vision was too poor.
What year was that?
It would have been 1980, 81.
Okay.
Yeah.
What rank were you when you separated from the military?
I was a commander, 05.
Okay.
Retired in 2003.
Oh, okay. Where were you when you entered? What were you doing before you went in the service?
So I was working at Ford Motor Company in Michigan, and the industry we were in a recession. The industry decided to lay a lot of folks off.
Right.
I had a mentor there that was an Air Force reservist, and he said, join the Air Force Reserves, get your training, and then by the time you finish training, Ford will be hiring back, and that's exactly what happened, as it turned out. But the Air Force said no to me wearing glasses, so at least in the assignment I wanted to fly. And so the Navy classified ad that's how old I am, they had classified ads back in the day.
Okay.
I saw a sign that if you wear glasses, you can fly in the Navy. So I went down to the recruiter, I took my package from the Air Force, they said, you're good to go, and they signed me up.
Okay. So you said you were a commander, right?
Correct.
And you also flew naval planes,
Yeah.
fighters.
No, I was a naval flight officer. I flew in the EP-3 Orion, I flew in the EA-3B Sky Warrior, and the ES-3 Viking. We called it the Shadow with all the...
What does ES-3 stand for?
So the E stands for electronic, S for surveillance, and then the 3 is just the next iteration in the line. So
Okay.
the S-3 Viking was a anti-surveillance aircraft. They took 16 of those and converted them to ES-3s for electronic surveillance.
What was your experience? How was your experience in basic training? How long was I would imagine that you went to basic training and then went to tech school.
So in the Navy, back when then it's changed, I went to Aviation Officer Candidate School, Pensacola, Florida. And I don't know, I can't remember exactly, about 3 months.
Okay,
So I came in July, and I got commissioned in November.
12 weeks.
Yeah. Yeah.
And tech school, where was that?
So then I went to
Where was basic?
So that is basic. That's for Aviation Officer Candidate School.
Where?
Pensacola, Florida.
Gotcha, you did say that. I apologize. Okay.
It's okay.
So tech school?
So that would have been the entry to flight school, would have been VT-10, right there in Pensacola. And I was there for about 4 months for basic, and then I was selected to go to Mather Air Force Base to continue.
So you were an officer from the beginning?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
so okay, got it.
Yeah.
And where, I apologize again, where was officers training school?
Pensacola, Florida.
Got it, everything right there, okay.
Yeah.
So you are a pilot. All right,
Naval flight officer.
Naval flight officer, okay. Where was your first duty station?
At VQ-2, Fleet Air Reconnaissance Squadron 2 in Rota, Spain.
And how long was that tour?
That was a 3-year tour, which was pretty standard for the Navy. Your first tour is about 3 years.
Okay, and did you retire from the service?
I did.
How many years did you total?
21.
Okay. So how was that tour in Spain?
It was fantastic.
I bet it was.
Fantastic. Fantastic.
Tell me all the places that you visited in Europe while you were stationed there.
Well, so the squadron was a very large squadron. We had both carrier-based aircraft and land-based. So I started my training, and we would deploy to Athens, Greece, for most of our land-based operations out of Helicon Air Force Base, which was a joint base between the Greeks commercial airport and the U.S. Air Force. And so that was basically the first 9 months I was in the squadron. And then I transitioned to the EA-3B Sky Warrior, and I started flying off carriers. And that's where I had the opportunity then to fly all over the
Mediterranean?
Yeah, absolutely. And then up into the North Sea as well.
Wow. Okay. What about Africa?
Well, in the Eastern Mediterranean, off the coast of Egypt, and I did port calls in Egypt and in Israel as well. Obviously, that's not Africa, but and Turkey. So the whole eastern part of the Mediterranean.
Gotcha. How was the food?
Well, you know, I love to eat, so yeah, fantastic. Every place I went, it was great food. Yeah, absolutely.
So tell me the countries you visited, the individual countries.
So starting with Greece, and then I went to Israel, Egypt. Coming around, I went on the north side to Turkey, to Italy, France, and obviously Spain. I lived in Spain. So those were the countries that were in the Mediterranean that we did port calls or we flew around. And then in the Atlantic, went to Scotland and Norway, and then did the Arctic on a carrier.
Okay.
Arctic Circle on a carrier, where I got my blue nose, which is probably not known to an Air Force guy, but it's when you go north of the certain latitude line.
Got it.
And
what's a blue nose?
well, it's equivalent of getting a shell back when you go across the equator. So there's two different ceremonies, but when you're up north, it's pretty cold, so they don't go crazy. It's pretty benign, but it just says that you've gone above a certain latitude. Yeah, they don't have an equivalent one that I know of for the southern hemisphere, but there is the equator. So, and that's the shellback.
Okay. I need to go back for a minute. What was that plane that you flew?
So I started out in the EP-3, E for electronic reconnaissance. Then I switched to the EA-3 Sky Warrior, which was given a nickname, the Whale, because of how big it was on the carrier.
Ever engaged in combat?
Well, we were an unarmed reconnaissance aircraft. So
right.
The closest we came was the standoff
which is
Libya.
critical.
Yeah, standoff of Libya, where Libya and the United States had an altercation. El Dorado Canyon, where we did an airstrike against Libya, and we flew in support of that, but we were off, probably 100 miles off the coast. So we were not actually engaged as the Air Force and the U.S. Navy airplanes did cross into Libya to deliver ordnance.
Was that while Gaddafi was in office?
Yes. Yeah, that would have been I want to say 86. I'm going to have to, kind of. The memory starts to fog, the actual year.
Not a problem.
Absolutely. Operation El Dorado Canyon was the name of it.
During that tour, that first tour, any incidences where anybody got any casualties, any death, any injuries?
Sure. So we had a couple things that happened. First is it's going to sound trivial, but in Athens, where we would have our liberty, there was a stretch of different bars, etc. That U.S. personnel would probably frequent more often than a lot of and maybe some tourists would go in there too. A terrorist left a satchel bomb and it blew up, and it caused no deaths, fortunately, but it did cause some serious injuries. Fortunately, I wasn't seriously injured, but that was probably the first incident.
So you were injured?
Yeah, just barely. I mean, I wasn't, we knocked to the ground, and it wasn't.
Yeah.
But we did have some folk with broken bones and some serious burns and things like that happened out of that bombing.
Are you drawing a disability from the VA?
I am.
So you are a disabled vet.
Yeah, 10% disability for hearing.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
pretty much. I would
Yeah, I
be
think
so-
that's a pretty common disability.
yeah, it is. See,
The most common, maybe.
uh-huh. Okay.
So in addition to that, we did lose one aircraft. Right at the end of my tour, we had an A3 that was unable to land on the carrier, and it actually crashed into the sea, and we lost 7 people in that incident, right at the very tail end of my tour there. So
What year
I went
was
back
that?
out to the Nimitz. It was on the Nimitz. I went back out. I wasn't going to go back out anymore, but I went out as a replacement personnel, and I flew there for another month until I PCS'd, or I left the squadron.
Right. What year was that?
That would have been 87.
Okay. All right. Next duty base.
So then I went to the Lockheed factory, where we flew factory acceptance of new P3 Orions coming off the line. So that was in Burbank, California, and I was there for 3 years. And it was called the Naval Plant Representative Office.
Okay.
So we had a small contingent of military, probably about 10 air crew and about 100 civilians that were in that office. And as an aircraft would be made available before the Navy accepted it, we would fly a test flight, actually multiple test flights, to make sure that it met all the parameters of the contract.
Okay. So at this period in time, where were you? Where was your duty base?
So that was the duty base. I was out basically in the civilian world. We didn't have a base that we worked from.
Okay.
We just went into an office.
That's what it sounded
that
like.
was at the Lockheed factory,
And where was that located?
Burbank, California.
Got it. Okay. Where was your next duty station?
So then I was selected to fly and transition to the ES-3 Shadow, and I went to VS-41, which is the Fleet Replacement Squadron, to learn how to fly the S-3. And then while that was in San Diego, and then from there I transitioned to Guam.
Wow.
To a fleet squadron, right.
So tell me about that tour.
Well, the big thing about that tour was I transitioned from being a tube rat, if you will, being in the back of the aircraft, to flying in the right front seat of the aircraft as a naval flight officer. So that was a transition.
And what were you flying in?
That was the Viking.
Okay.
Yeah. We called our version of it the Sea Shadow, and we had about 60 different antennas on it. It had the aerodynamics of a refrigerator. It did. It was very slow, and it was, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any casualties during that tour?
Fortunately, no one, we didn't have
Nobody
any,
got hurt.
any
Good,
issues.
good, good. How was the food?
The problem with Guam is that you're out in the middle of nowhere, and everything has to be shipped in. There aren't really any indigenous, there's not indigenous produce. They don't grow their own vegetables, and there is some small amount of fishing that you'd think it would be huge, but actually almost all the food is imported. So it was basically, canned Spam, and I'm exaggerating a little bit, but that's where Spam was probably most popular, right?
Well, I think,
Yeah,
if I remember correctly, they like a lot of pork in the Philippines.
Well, the Spam has pork in it, so yeah.
Right.
But you got to remember that Guam is still 2,000 or 3,000 miles from the Philippines. It is out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean.
Okay, right.
Yeah, it is far away.
I was going to ask you, but anyway, so did you? By the way, R&R in both of your tours so far, I think we did up to 3 maybe. Well, I probably should wait and ask that for last. Actually,
Okay.
all the places I'm going to ask you, all the places that you visited or country, where you were stationed
Yep.
during your entire tour. You said 21 years, right?
Yeah. So there was a slogan when I joined the Navy. Join the Navy, see the world.
Right.
And that's exactly what happened. I was able to visit, dozens of countries and literally circumvent the world. Absolutely. So when we went to Guam, we didn't do a lot of travel from there, other than to the islands nearby, and then we would fly back to the United States and to Hawaii for our leave or vacation. And so that was, you're out in the middle of nowhere. It's not like an easy jump to get on an airplane and go somewhere when it takes 8 to 10 hours to get anywhere from Guam.
Right.
Came back to the United States, back to that replacement squadron I told you about as an instructor, VS 41 in San Diego, at NAS North Island, Naval Air Station North Island. And we were there for several years and then went back to VQ5, but this time VQ5 had moved from Guam and they were now stationed at North Island. So that was just across the ramp to that duty station.
Got it.
Now on that duty station where I was the officer in charge of a detachment, I deployed on the Carl Vinson in CAG 14 and we went back to the Persian Gulf.
Okay.
And that would have been my second opportunity we were in Desert Strike on that one. On that
Okay.
cruise.
Next duty station.
So from there, I went to shore tour. I was at the Space and Naval Warfare Systems Command in San Diego, and I was part of an acquisition team that basically purchased Navy, for the Navy, computers and communication equipment. So that was a shore tour, flying a desk. And then my final duty station, I left that one just a little bit early, about 2 years at that station. I went to the U.S. Embassy in London, where I was stationed at the Office of Defense Cooperation, and I was there for 3 years with my family.
Okay.
And that was my final duty station.
When did you get married?
Don't ask me that on camera, I can't remember.
Not a problem. Not a problem.
1990.
Okay. Next duty station.
1989. See, there I've already forgot my daughter was born in 1990.
Okay.
You're gonna get me in big trouble.
I'm trying not to.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hopefully my wife won't watch this.
You know she will, but anyway, if she sees the link, I'm sure she will. But
Yeah.
that's not my business. What year are we up to now?
So I retired in 2003.
Uh-huh.
So that would have been my final year in the Navy.
Okay.
Retired from the U.S. Embassy in London, came back to the United States, and then started working in the private sector.
Came back from where?
From the U.S. Embassy in London.
In London. What did you do there?
So I worked in the Office of Defense Cooperation, was the Navy, basically they had an Army, Navy, and
How long were you
Air Force.
there?
3 years.
Uh-huh.
Well, actually about 3 years and 3 months.
Okay.
3 years, a little bit longer. I would have stayed longer if I could have, but that's a very popular duty station, so they don't let folks extend their stay there. So
Right. I remember
Yeah.
those kinds of things.
yeah.
So where did you call out all the places that you visited in Europe?
So when we lived in London, Europe is very close by airplane. You can go everywhere,
Right.
And we did take advantage of that. So we traveled all throughout Europe,
The whole thing.
and took advantage of that opportunity. So much so my kids got used to the travel, so that when I retired, and we moved back to the United States, they were expecting to go somewhere every weekend, and we were sorry that we weren't doing that.
It's a different
Yeah.
lifestyle, huh? Everything.
So as an example, some of the things we got to do, we went to Rome. We had Mass with the Pope, which was fantastic.
Wow.
That was just kind of a,
What pope was there then?
so that was John Paul II. So it was just it was serendipity. We didn't plan it. It just happened. We were in just the right place at the right time, so that turned out to be nice. It did help the fact that I was at the embassy in London, so that when we went to Rome, we connected with the embassy in Rome, and they just happened to have a couple opportunities for us to go to the Mass. So.
I missed that. I got to San Marco, Venice,
Yeah.
Aviano, what was it?
Mhm.
Anyway, so yeah, it was the. What was your impression of the architecture in Italy?
Well, Italy is probably my second favorite. I mean, I love Spain because I lived there, and my Spanish was terrible, but they were very friendly. It was really a great place to live. But Italy is by far my most favorite place in the world.
Okay.
It's fantastic, and I had a chance to visit a lot of different cities while I was on my first tour on leave. And also with port call, so went to Naples several times. Went to Venice. We were in Sicily, and then obviously went to Rome, and then did some other travel throughout.
Did you get up to Amsterdam,
I did.
the Netherlands?
I did that on my first tour, and then I took my family back when we lived in London. We took a trip, and we had a wonderful time.
What about Berlin?
So on my first tour, the wall was still up. For us to go to Berlin, we needed to get special permission to go in. I took the troop train, and went into, into East Germany and then into Berlin and over Christmas. And that was the kind of like my last trip while I was on that, in Spain. My last bit of vacation or leave.
What are two of the most memorable experiences that you had while you were in the service?
Boy, there's a lot, so,
Two.
yeah. So when I was in London, I had the opportunity to assist with presidential visits. We had two presidents come to visit. And it doesn't matter who the president is, I'll just say that.
Excuse me.
So, but one of the we had two different presidents while I was there, and I had an opportunity to support one of his visits, and I have a picture of my son shaking hands with the president. So to me, that was a special time. That was the same visit I walked in at the ambassador's house where they were staying, and just walked in on the president eating breakfast. It was kind of surreal.
Which president?
That was President Bush.
Wow.
Yeah, it was kind of cool. They just allowed us to walk in. He was, eating a bowl of cereal, or I don't know what he was eating, but it was kind of an interesting thing. And then on my first tour, I guess maybe my most memorable experience would be my first catapult shot off the USS Nimitz in the A3. That was, that's another pretty fun thing that happens.
Just real quick, when my father passed, he was 99.
Oh, good genetics there.
Yeah. And I had the honor to take him on a flight
Okay.
to Washington, D.C.
Yep.
Trying to remember the name of the gentleman. I don't know. Maybe later. Anyway, one of the, I'm almost there. The heck was his name? I shot the video. If you saw it, you know who I'm talking about. So we'll just move on. I apologize.
Okay.
So anyways, the overall effect of the military on your life, and also the, I guess you could say, how did the military affect your life regarding your I guess really your thought process
Sure.
about war?
Well, okay, so when I came in, there wasn't a burning desire to join the military. I just been laid off at Ford Motor. I was just looking for for work, basically.
Mhm.
So I had the opportunity.
Were you drafted or enlisted?
No, I came in on my own.
Right.
Yeah, volunteer. So the draft had ended by the time I was 18. It had just started. So I graduated high school in 1974, and then I went to the university, graduated there in 1978. And by that time, the draft had officially ended. They weren't taking folks anymore after 74, so
Right.
didn't have to do that. So it wasn't even in my scan, as they call it. I wasn't thinking about the military. Even when I was at the university, and I had some friends that were in ROTC, it just wasn't something that had any interest to me. I had nobody in my family that had been in the military, and so it just didn't enter my brain to think about what kind of a career I would have in the military. So working at Ford, I had that mentor that was an Air Force reservist. He got me interested in doing it just because of the timing. And so then once I started looking into it, then I became more interested, but not necessarily as a career, just as a job.
Okay.
And it took probably 3 or 4 years of being in the Navy for it to finally start to change probably the person I was, so that now it became more of being in the service, if you will, of others, as opposed to just being a job. And then I think after 20 years, that probably is in my DNA now.
Okay.
Yeah, it did make a change, right?
That is what
Yeah,
happens.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And I will say that whatever you're being trained for, and I don't know, there's 100 different jobs in the military. You want to prove that you can do your job.
Right.
That's just what you want to do. And so whatever you can do to do that, that becomes a driving factor. So if you're flying and you're a fighter, then you want to be able to prove that you're a good fighter. Then you want to be in that kind of situation to prove it. I was in as I said, an aerodynamically challenged airplane. Right, we were very slow. We were typically out alone and unafraid, as and so we weren't necessarily looking to fight anybody. We were just out there.
Still had to be brave.
You have to get out. You have to be out there alone and unafraid. So the sister squadron of ours was the one, and I don't know if you remember this. It was about 15 years ago. That was maybe even
Bob Dole. That's who my dad.
Oh,
I'll send you send you the link.
Fantastic. Okay.
And
Senator Bob Dole from
yes,
okay.
exactly. That's who he was sitting there with.
Okay.
And he told my father that well, he said both things that we were proud of each other.
Fantastic.
That's
Yeah.
what.
He was a fine American, absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So now I was just going to say that, this didn't happen to me, this happened to a sister squadron, but they were intercepted by a Chinese fighter. The Chinese fighter collided with the airplane and forced it, the Chinese pilot was killed, and it forced the squadron airplane to go into a Chinese airfield and was seriously damaged. They probably should have ditched, but they were able to land safely. Nobody was hurt except for the Chinese pilot who was killed. So that was the kind of mission that we would have been on. We were not in direct combat per se. We were out typically off, in international airspace, but usually alone. So we were not, we didn't have fighters on our own wing protecting us. We were, as I said, alone and unafraid. So that was just a typical type mission that we would fly.
Okay. A few more questions.
Sure.
We're almost there. Okay. Have you retained any friendships from the military?
Sure. So we've had a couple reunions with the squadron. My first squadron, which has been fantastic to maintain those friendships. And I think those friendships that you make are they're pretty strong, right? Because
the camaraderie is generally over the top.
Yeah, absolutely. And we did have one of the first integrated squadrons too. So we were male female. We had the first female that flew as aircrew.
Wow,
in our
nice.
squadron. So that was
what year was that?
So that was in 1984 to 87 when I went to that squadron.
Okay.
So yeah.
Okay. How has the military affected your life?
Well, obviously it's been my whole life, right? So I didn't come in thinking I was going to make it a career. I thought I would come in and do a touch and go. Basically come in, be in the military for several years, and then go back to my career at Ford Motor, right? Well, that just didn't work out that way. And I just continued to serve. And I stayed in for 20 and
Is anything that you have left out of this conversation that you would like to share?
I can't think of anything else. I'm sure I'll think of something when I leave, but I think we covered
That's what always happens.
We're trying to cover 20 years in 20 minutes is kind of tough. But
Right. Well,
absolutely.
it's 30.
Yeah. Okay. If it's been 30, that's good.
Well, this is a very interesting conversation. I've had many very interesting conversations. It really is. Well, I mean, it's personal also, not only just professional. To sit and listen and have conversation, make friends,
Sure.
make connections.
Yeah.
With all of us that have served.
Right.
I mean, this is your interview, but just really on a short note, I wish that I had done 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
I only did 6.
Okay.
Because I loved being in the military, but
Right.
home drew me back home.
Sure.
And
that's the case for most people, right?
Right,
I mean, that's
yeah.
just the nature of the way that the pyramid is set, right?
So education,
Yeah.
you went in as an officer.
I did.
What was your first degree?
Political science.
Where?
Which was from the University of Cincinnati.
Were you there physically, or did you do it online?
Oh, physically. We didn't have online back in the day.
Gotcha. Next, how many degrees? Go ahead next.
That's it. That's the only.
Okay.
I stopped at a bachelor's degree. Now, I did have some service schools. I went to Darden. Maybe had a special deal with the University of Virginia. for executive education, and I went to Defense Systems Management College for acquisition when I was at Spay War Systems Command. So
Okay.
those are service-specific schools. Weren't I didn't get a master's degree or anything like that. So my wife has a master's. I don't.
I got you. Okay. Is there anything else that you feel that you have not mentioned in this interview that you would like to share? I think, did I ask you that already?
You did ask me that, and I can't think of anything.
So
right
you're
now.
good.
Yeah, we'll think of it later as we leave.
Right. So
Yeah.
I need to thank you for your military service to the country, and I also need to thank you for a great interview.
Okay, great. Well, I was happy to do it.
Well,
All right. Thanks, Carlton.
yes, sir. You're more than welcome.
All right.
All right.